Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto met the Moon Kingdom's samurai princess and everything changed? Part 1. Tsukimori Seiichiro was a prematurely aged man of 35. His straw blonde hair was graying at the temples, even when he let his hair out of his top knot. Worry lines were settling into his forehead and at the corners of his eyes. He frowned when he saw the lines forming at the corners of his mouth, which he knew just made that problem worse. These marks of old age found origins in the many years he had spent silently stewing over negotiations and his ambassadorial work for the king of the land of the moon. Seiichiro had no stomach for politics, and as such he was not one of the king's favorites. His tendency to never sugarcoat or to tell white lies kept him from reaching political power. However, it was the one reason why the king kept him around. Seiichiro was honest to a fault. Another unbecoming tendency of his was that he spoke infrequently. He realized as he got older more can be learned from listening rather than speaking. It also helped that if a man spoke seldomly, people were more likely to listen to what he had to say. Although his mind had steered him through more tough situations than his body had, he still remained stout and strong. Seiichiro was well over 6 feet tall, a veritable giant amongst men, let alone the scrawny diplomats he usually dealt with. He always wore his armor and carried around his 8-foot studded kanabo, something that often ruffled the feathers of other dignitaries. No one will believe you are a man of peace if you carry on like you are going to war, they would say. Seiichiro's response was always the same. No one is better to speak on behalf of peace than one who has witnessed war firsthand. This was no way to make friends, but relationships had always proven difficult for him. He had lost his wife, the only person he had ever fallen in love with, 10 years ago. Yukihana had been even more closed-lipped than he was, and so she was the only person he had ever felt comfortable confiding in. He was the third son in his clan and was on bad terms with both his brothers, one for marrying Yukihana out from under him and the other for marrying her at all. His 15-year-old daughter, Becky, held just as complicated a place in his heart. She was the only thing in this world he held dear, and so he tried to shelter her from all the ugly truths of the world. However, all the travel his work demanded of them exposed her to so much worse than he was prepared to explain. This made it hard for him to have casual conversations with her. Becky, the ever-talkative, energetic, easygoing, and open-hearted child made him feel that much older and more cynical. Every time she spoke of how nice the people of a village were, he wanted to tell her how cruel and prejudiced their leaders were. Whenever she talked of how beautiful the traditional crafts of a town were, he wanted to tell her they were all fakes, inferior dupes of all the great things that came before. He seethed when he thought about how he had brought a child into this debaucherous, hateful world. He hated himself even more when he caught himself buying one of said tacky trinkets for his daughter just to see her smile. He was a spiritual man, so he prayed about it all. He prayed for guidance on the issues he represented on behalf of his king and his village. He prayed for safety for himself and his daughter on the long roads they traveled. He prayed for the soul of his departed wife and for the salvation of his own tattered soul. He prayed for that ugly world every night, and that he somehow could make a small difference in it. When he wasn't praying, working, or training, he caught himself talking to his wife. It comforted him to remember her and imagine the advice she would give him. Even in death she was his moral compass. That's what he was doing right now, talking to his wife about his latest dilemma while Becky slept soundly in her futon on the other side of the room. Visual art and design. Something dark is in the works, Yuki-chan. The king has never asked me to leave Becky behind, he mumbled. He created a small blue flame in his hand using an illumination jutsu. He pretended it was her spirit flickering in his hand. He heard her voice in his head. And you refused. Do you not trust your king? Yuki shimmered. I don't trust those in his court, and, Seiichiro sighed. I told him I would keep her in the village I will be negotiating with. I told him if I used her as collateral they would be more likely to trust me in a large village. So you will just leave your daughter to the whims of the leaf? Yuki burned accusingly. I don't know, Yuki. For once, I don't know. No amount of praying or meditating or anything is bringing me the answer. I don't even know why I said it, to be honest, Seiichiro stammered. It just came out of my mouth when I thought about Becky being left alone with all those vipers in court. I would rather get her an appointment as an apprentice to a weaponsmith on the other side of the world than leave her there. They'd rot out all the good in her and turn her into a hollow shell. Like you, Yuki smoked. Like me, Seiichiro sighed. The forces at hand are always mysterious and we can't always see where we are being guided, Tsukimori Seiichiro. Walk with faith and the world won't know you ever stumbled. Yuki said. You're right, Yuki. As always, Seiichiro sighed. Go put another blanket on the girl, Yuki chastised, tiny flames licking his hands. I can hear her teeth chattering from here. Seiichiro smiled and snuffed out the flame with his other palm. He walked over to her, threw his blanket over Becky, whose teeth were chattering, and sat down to sleep with his back against the wall and his eyes on the door. Standardized and admissions tests. Why do I need all this stuff? Becky asked as she pulled the wagon of supplies. By looking at her, you could tell she came from the same stock as her father. She was on the taller side, with long lean muscular limbs. Seiichiro had kept her out of active duty as much as he could, so although she was in title a kunoichi, Becky had seen little action in the field. This kept a softness about her that other girls in her situation lacked. The other evidence of her absence from action was her obscenely long hair. It was the silvery gold that ran through most of the Tsukimori line, thick as a lion's mane and braided it reached down to her waist. I don't know where they are going to end up putting you up, and so help me God I don't want people saying we're paupers. Seiichiro glowered. The longer he stewed on leaving his daughter behind with the leaf nin, the more he considered finding her a nice blacksmith to apprentice for. Some of the biggest nightmares in shinobi history had come from that village: Orochimaru, Madara, and Uchiha Itachi. Not to mention the damn Jinchuriki they had running around like the town pet. All he could picture was Becky getting crushed under a giant orange paw. They're going to have food and toilet paper, I'm sure. Becky looked at the supplies. I mean, bring a decent bottle of wine and maybe some rice. Anyone who gets upset over me using their paper towels is not someone I want to stay with. I just want to make sure you are provided for, Seiichiro said. Then take me along with you, damn it. Becky said. No one needs to know. I'll camp out a few miles from town whenever you have to go in. The king will know, Becky, and I can't go back on my word. Seiichiro said. You're not a samurai, Dad, you're a ninja. Ninja are supposed to be all trickery and deceit. Becky looked at him slyly. All I'm good for is my word, Becky. That's part of my nindo. He explained. A Tsukimori is where he says he is, fights where he says he'll fight, and always stands his ground, Becky finished. I know. But I'm in a Tsukimori. And their credo was a little different. Burn the ashes and salt the earth, Seiichiro smiled. And run if you know you can't win. I remember Mom saying it more like, live to fight another day and fight like hell, Becky corrected. That was her version of it, Seiichiro chuckled. A silence fell over the two of them, Becky focusing on not overturning the wagon on the rocky country roads, and Seiichiro ruminating on how much a person is like their parent, even after that parent is gone. What if they want to hold me under house arrest in some tiny dank apartment with creepy old men watching me all the time? Becky asked. Then you'll make dainty little curtains out of the bed sheets I bought you, Seiichiro said, his face deadpan. What if all they give me to eat with my rice are natto and nori? Becky whined. Then I'll bring you lots of mint chewing gum the next time I'm in town, Seiichiro's face cracked with a slight smile. You're impossible. You don't even feel bad about leaving me behind, do you? Becky asked, pouting. I'm not left with much of a choice, Becky. He looked down, ashamed of his disloyalty. The king demanded you remain behind while I negotiate this deal, and I worry of the intentions for you at court. Becky looked at him long and hard. Admissions like this were rare from her father, so she relented. All right, if you say so. I'll try to behave, but if they try to make me eat natto, I'm going to throw a tantrum. Becky smiled. You have my permission, he smiled back. Becky's eyes lit up at the sight of the gates of the hidden leaf. They were the biggest gates she had ever seen, and when she looked through them she caught glimpses of the legendary mountain with the faces of the previous Hokage carved into it. She was almost dancing with excitement, and her father rolled his eyes. No leader ever took a man seriously if he had a flighty daughter like Becky. It was amazing his career hadn't fallen apart yet. Seiichiro approached the guards at the station outside the gates and presented his papers. Welcome, Ambassador Tsukimori, they bowed respectfully. He bowed in return. Thank you, gentlemen. If you wouldn't mind sending word to the Hokage we have arrived, I'm going to get us checked in at the inn. He looked over at his daughter, who was staring intently at the headband of one of the guards. Can I help you, miss? He asked, flushing slightly. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the symbol. Is it a big swirly leaf or? Becky asked. The guard chuckled good-naturedly and took it off to show her. Seiichiro was mortified to silence by his daughter's simple-minded assumptions. This part, the curly part, is the wind. This little triangle bit is the leaf. The guard explained. Oh, so you're like a leaf on the wind. Catchy. She smiled. Excuse my daughter's curiosity. It's her first time out this far west. Seiichiro smiled, giving Becky the side-eye that indicated she was to shut her mouth, promptly. She smiled obliviously. I love getting to see the big villages. The guards shared a subtle look, as though this blonde ambassador's daughter was about to become the butt of an inside joke. You'll see more of it once we're in the gates, Seiichiro sighed. Come on, Becky. She followed her father obediently, but her head snapped back and forth so often as she took in the sights her neck cramped. He checked them into a simple unassuming inn. Once inside, he told Becky to stay put until he sent word for her. Come on, Dad, it's just the Leaf Village. Let me explore a little, she pleaded. So we'll have to send Leaf Nin looking for you? I think not, he said. I'll just hang out on this street, I swear, she begged. He sighed. Fine. Ask the innkeeper what shops are nearby. Make up your decision and tell them which one you are going to. If we send for you, they'll know where to find you. Thanks, Dad, she yelled over her shoulder as she hurried out the door. If you get kidnapped by Orochimaru, I won't feel sorry for you. He yelled out after her. In their family, Orochimaru was the boogeyman. He was the cause of Yukihana's death, and the threat of his reappearance in a closet or under a bed was something both Becky and Seiichiro quietly feared. As he walked out of the room toward the entrance of the inn, he saw his daughter talking to the innkeeper. She was a kindly older woman and she was dressed as traditionally as her inn. She was laughing behind her hand at something Becky had said. Becky looked as excited as always as she listened to the innkeeper explain the surrounding area and all the treasures it held. Maybe she'll be okay here, Seiichiro thought. Tsunade was speaking with Hyuga Hiyashi when word reached her of Tsukimori Seiichiro's arrival. If he arrives at the mansion before we are done here, let him know I will be with him shortly. Tsunade waved her hand dismissively. Hiyashi waited until the nin had left before he continued. As I said, she's been listless lately. After coming home prematurely from training to find her team out on a long-term mission, Hiyashi paused, trying to find the words to convey the situation. I'm afraid she lacks a sense of purpose. Then we will assign her some missions here in town, Tsunade said as she reached for her log of available missions. She is no fool, Tsunade, Hiyashi frowned. She will know we are giving her busy work. Then it needs to be a long-term assignment, she thought aloud. I don't know what I have that would work, not a lot of visiting dignitaries. Her eyes lit up and a smile cracked her lips. What is it, Lady Hokage? Hiyashi asked, however his voice stayed flat, so it came out more like a statement. The ambassador from Getsugakur just arrived, Tsunade explained. I know you are a busy man, Hiyashi, but if you wouldn't mind sticking around for after my meeting with him, I may have an assignment for your daughter. As his bodyguard during his stay, Hiyashi made the same sort of statement question. Perhaps, she tapped her desk with her capped pen absently. Tsukimori has visited the Leaf enough and is far too clever a shinobi to need an escort of his own. However, he's also played the political game too long to refuse one if assigned to him. Hiyashi considered the proposal and after a moment replied. All right, I will attend to an important matter and return shortly. That should work, Hiyashi. Tsunade stood to see him out. Tsukimori probably won't be here for another half hour or so. Until then, Tsunade-sama, Hiyashi bowed and took his leave. Please Tsukimori, Tsunade thought. Have some important sounding busy work for me. Seiichiro drew attention walking through town in his great ancestral armor. When it was new, it would have gleamed silver and gold like moonbeams. The tales of his predecessors said that it had originally belonged to the first Tsukimori, Haruka, the burned maiden. 7 generations later, it had a dull greenish-black patina. The patterns inlaid into the metal had long since faded. The swirling shapes of their ghosts occasionally caught the light and gave the haunting impression of faces of lost souls trapped in the plates. It had black splatter stains of questionable origin that no amount of polishing could remove. It was almost a living thing, having absorbed the chakra of the great clansmen before him, wearing it from their youth to their death. Legend had it more than once its wearer had fallen on the battlefield only to be immediately donned by their sons. The armor would mold itself to the new body instantly, having felt its previous owner's passing. Seiichiro's donning of the armor had been less noble, but that wasn't a story he wanted to reflect on before asking a favor of the Hokage. The guards eyed him long and hard as he approached. He had kept his Oni mask off, so he met the physical description the guards before had passed along. They led him up the stairs, but he felt their eyes on his back the whole time. Tsunade's assistant, Shizune, announced him. Lady Tsunade, Tsukimori Seiichiro of Getsugakur is here to see you, Shizune said with a bow. Long time no see, Tsunade Heim, Seiichiro said staring her down. Surprised they could pry you out of the gambling hall to take this job. I've heard you died in battle about a half-dozen times in the last 2 years, Tsunade stared right back. I see they were right. You look like a dead man walking. Seiichiro liked Tsunade. She wasn't anything like the old windbag the third Hokage had been. That man stank of all the sins of the old world. For years Seiichiro had avoided doing business with the Leaf because the third had resumed his duties as Hokage. When word of his death at the hand of his old student reached Getsugakur, Seiichiro found himself thinking the old man deserved it. If he had stopped Orochimaru years before, lots of families would have been spared death and suffering. Tsunade had been just as screwed over by all that old world thinking, so Seiichiro didn't mind working with her. In a village where generations had been trying to hide the fact they were screw-ups, Tsunade embraced her dysfunction. She was a drinker and a gambler, she was vain and she was proud. It was easy doing business with someone who kept all their cards on the table. Take a seat, old man, Tsunade waved a lacquered hand at the seat across from her. That's funny coming from someone old enough to be my mother, he spat, taking the offered seat. So you're the man they sent to speak for the king? Tsunade asked. I'm the only one who won't warp the message, he adjusted in the seat. Something could be said of heads of state keeping uncomfortable chairs in their office. Tsunade apparently didn't like people settling in and making themselves at home. I'm not clever enough to look out for my own interests. So he is insisting you bring this information back and forth in person. Tsunade asked. All the juicy stuff that shouldn't be in writing, Seiichiro explained. No one usually bothers me on the road. I've been told it's my winning smile. So who's the pretty girl you brought into town with you? Tsunade's informers had been hard at work. My daughter, Becky, he said. I actually need to talk to you about her. She isn't a Jinchuriki with supernatural powers and a hunger for blood, is she? Tsunade smiled. No, just your typical teenage energy and idiocy, he replied. But that's not the issue at hand. To prove we are acting in earnest through these negotiations, I am to offer my daughter as collateral. So a non-hostile hostage arrangement, Tsunade clacked her nails on the desk. And why would we be interested in babysitting your kid? It's both for you and for the king, Seiichiro explained. If the facts don't match up, I can't run off. Not that the thought would ever cross your mind, Tsunade eyed him coyly. Never, Seiichiro shook his head. So the king has offered to pay for her living expenses in a location of your choosing. I am not supposed to put my 2 ryo into this, but I would prefer it if she was not placed anywhere with bars and communal toilets. Of course not, don't be obtuse, Tsunade smirked. I actually think I have something that would work perfectly. Shizune, bring in Hyuga Hiyashi. A Hyuga? Seiichiro asked. The Hyuga, Tsunade corrected. Hiyashi entered the room and the two men sized each other up. Suon stepped in to make the introductions. Hyuga Hiyashi, this is Tsukimori Seiichiro, the ambassador for Getsugakur. He will be representing the interests of the king in some upcoming negotiations. In an act of good faith to our village, his daughter will remain here in Konoha for the duration of the talks, Tsunade explained. Hyuga Hiyashi's daughter, Hinata, was recently sent away on a special mission. Between then and her return, the rest of her squad was deployed on a long-term mission. We have been looking for a longer-term local assignment worthy of her skills and status as heiress of the Hyuga clan. Escort and bodyguard to the daughter of an ambassador would be a perfect fit, Seiichiro said, slightly impressed. It would be unbecoming for the daughter of an ambassador to be hosted somewhere unfitting of her status, Tsunade nodded. There is no private residence more secure and prestigious than that of the Hyuga clan. Seiichiro couldn't believe his luck. His daughter would be kept in a compound with the most prominent family in Konoha. My daughter, Becky, is 15, Seiichiro's mind was blank. He was still trying to process his good luck. The same age as Hinata, Hiyashi seemed unfazed, as if this deal had been a long time coming. This just keeps getting better and better, Seiichiro thought. The king of Getsugakur has offered to pay for Becky's living expenses, Tsunade explained. We can come up with an itemized list of her monthly needs and. I won't hear of it, Hiyashi shook his head. It would be the honor and the privilege of the Hyuga family to host Tsukimori Becky. Hyuga Hiyashi, I must insist, Seiichiro interrupted. If you would like to provide your daughter with an allowance, I would take no offense, Hiyashi stopped him. Your daughter will be a guest in our house and shall be treated as such. Thank you for your hospitality, Seiichiro bowed, and Hiyashi bowed in return. I guess all that's left is for us to bring in the girls, Tsunade smiled. Hinata stood in the Hokage's office, numb and ready for her new mission. She hoped it would be dangerous or located somewhere far off. It had been so long since she could focus her foggy mind on something tangible. The Hokage waited until Shizune had closed the door and settled into position beside her. Tsunade always had a very stern expression, however today she looked downright ominous. Hyuga Hinata, I have an important assignment for you, Tsunade said, her voice almost a growl. It will be your duty, and your duty alone to see it is carried out. Yes, Lady Hokage. Hinata nodded, then waited patiently for the Hokage to continue. Some very important talks will be going on between our village and Getsugakur, Tsunade explained. There is no guarantee of how long they will last, but it will undoubtedly be for at least a few months. Hinata grew hopeful. Getsugakur was on the other side of the world. Would she be escorting dignitaries there and back? That would surely be dangerous as well as time-consuming. Anything to soften the eternity between now and when Naruto returned from training, she thought. She saw him in her mind's eye. His warm charming smile even in memory was enough to make her shyly smile back. Hinata realized that she had been smiling at the Hokage and flushed with embarrassment. Tsunade called no attention to it and resumed speaking. The ambassador for their village, Tsukimori Seichiro, will be speaking on behalf of their king, and so throughout the talks he will have to travel frequently between the two, Tsunade continued. To keep the talks from falling apart and as a demonstration they are acting in earnest, the king has offered the ambassador's daughter, Tsukimori Beki, to us as collateral until the deal is sealed. Poor girl, Hinata thought. How awful would it be to be treated like a bargaining chip? As the heiress of the Hyuga clan, Hinata was in a similar position of value. So much so in fact, there had been attempts by other villages to capture her in the past, for both the ransom and her Byakugan. Hiyashi, however, would never allow either of his daughters to be traded around the way it sounded like the king was doing with this Tsukimori girl. Because of your status as the heiress to the Hyuga clan, we thought it would be fitting for you to play hostess and escort to Tsukimori Beki through the duration of the talks. Hinata's heart sank. She would be playing babysitter to an ambassador's daughter. Hinata did not want to accept the assignment. As sorry as she felt for this girl's situation, Hinata did not want to be stuck pent up in her house and in the village for months with a strange girl tied to her hip. On the other hand, Hinata did understand Tsunade's logic. Hinata was an heiress, and that was exactly the sort of thing heiresses were expected to do. Even if Hinata had felt the urge to object, however, there was something about the way Tsunade spoke that had an air of finality. This whole arrangement had already been decided upon. It would not be fitting or proper for Hinata to refuse a direct request of the Hokage, especially with a delicate matter of state such as this. The only positive outcome she could hope for would be to go in graciously and accept it for the honor it was supposed to be. I accept the assignment, Lady Hokage, Hinata relented. Thank you, Hinata, Tsunade said. This is a great favor to me and to your village. Hinata bowed silently, cursing herself for her lack of spine. Beki is your age, Hinata. Tsunade's expression softened. And her background as an ambassador's daughter may give you two some common ground. It isn't guaranteed, but this might be an opportunity for you to make a friend and ally of someone who may one day be a powerful figure in Getsugakur. Positions are inherited there, aren't they? Hinata recalled something to that effect being mentioned back when she was in the academy. Typically, unless there is no one to inherit the position or they were forced to resign due to scandal, Tsunade explained. Something was nagging at Hinata about the assignment. It seemed straightforward enough, but it was as if some gossamer thread of important information was wiggling just out of her reach. Was there more to this than just keeping an eye on Konoha's ward through the talks? An idea crossed her mind, and before she could stop herself Hinata asked. Will Tsukimori Beki become the ambassador for Getsugakur in the future? Tsunade simply nodded, and the silence that fell between them was very telling. Hinata now understood the real motives behind the Beki's placement in her hands. Motives ultimately always turned out to be about politics or duty to one's family and village. They were hoping that Hinata, as a future potential leader in Konoha, would take this opportunity to benefit Konoha at a later time. Acid roiled in Hinata's stomach and resisted the urge to wince. Hinata just hoped that Tsukimori Beki felt the same way she did about all of this. Your fathers have arranged for you two to have dinner together while they discuss the arrangements, Tsunade broke the silence. Try to have fun, Hinata. Hinata bowed, keeping her expression blank. The image of Naruto's smile was the only thing keeping her from screaming in rage. Yes, Lady Hokage. She's my age. Becky's eyebrow was edged suspiciously. Yes, my child, Seiichiro sighed. He had told her the whole story and the two had sat in silence a full 5 minutes before she had responded. And she is the heiress to the most powerful clan in Konoha. Becky could only figure that to become the heiress of a clan from a ruthless village like the Leaf, there had to be trail of blood and bodies behind her a mile long. Is she nice? Becky watched her father's face. He was an ambassador and a ninja. His dishonesties were nearly impossible to detect, but every once in a while a twitch or slight aversion in his gaze would give him away. I have heard she is very kind and graceful. He sounded sincere. Becky bit her lip. She was an ambassador's daughter, but she had always been affectionately referred to as Seiichiro's wild child. Good-natured dignitaries had always chuckled at her bursting into important meetings with skinned knees, grass stains, and brambles in her hair. He was a single father, and she earned him a lot of sympathy points with her escapades. This Hinata girl sounded like the perfect politician's daughter by the sound of it. People described her as kind and graceful. Becky was jokingly described as Oni ni Kanabo, an unstoppable force. She worried their personalities would clash and the next few months would be miserable. Becky would infuriate Hinata by being too carefree, and Becky would be miserable trying to be good and always somehow causing mischief anyway, tarnishing that precious reputation of Hinata's. It's going to be fine, Becky-chan, her father said as he placed his hand on her head reassuringly. You have a good heart and that is what sees you through even the worst of your trouble. Anyone who sees you knows there is no meanness in you. Becky hung her head. It was settling in. She would be separated from her father for months. That's why he was being so affectionate. This was going to be hard for both of them. Neither of them had ever really been alone so long. She would be halfway around the world, in a village known for wiping out other villages and cranking out serial killers like Orochimaru. Her father would probably be worrying about her constantly, putting his life and his career in jeopardy every time he traveled between the villages. Seiichiro was a hard, strong man. Becky had seen stare him down groups of bandits with no one to back him up and a child clinging to his leg. She was going to miss him a lot. She would miss the security and safety he gave her. She would miss his company and his perfect diplomatic wit. Becky did something she hadn't dared since she was small enough to be scared of the dark. She hugged her father tight. In that small moment of weakness she had shown her father she was still a little girl. For all his trying to make her strong and hard, Becky was still a lamb in the woods. He hugged her back and cried into his sleeve so she would never feel his tears. Hinata had opened the windows to one of the guest rooms of her house. It was not the largest, nor was it the most luxurious, but if she were to have to stay in one of the other rooms it would be this one. It had some of the best light in the house. It faced the east, so it got all of the gentle morning sun but stayed cool during the hot afternoons. It was also a fair distance away from the master bedroom, so both girls would be sure to have some privacy. Hinata had also had the linens laundered, so the bed and towels were fresh. On her way home from the Hokage's mansion, she had popped into the Yamanaka's flower shop and picked a bouquet of alstroemeria and daffodils, friendship and new beginnings. Their pinks and yellows brightened the room and gave it a fresh perfume. Hinata sat on the edge of the bed and hoped that all this work toward ensuring another's happiness might make her happy, too. She prayed that Becky would be a kindred spirit, another lonely bird in a gilded cage, and somehow they might learn to sing together in spite of the forces that decided their lives for them. Becky fidgeted nervously as she walked with her father from the inn to the Hyuga compound. She was in her finest kimono, its sleeves hanging almost to her ankles. It was an inky black, the color of the sky in the dead of night. Along the sleeves and around the back, smoky silver clouds hovered over a great golden moon. Beneath the sky was a lake, complete with cattails, dragonflies, and gently lapping waves. Her obi had been her mother's, and as such was the same icy blue of her eyes. It suited Becky's gray eyes and fair blonde hair, but it had been much more striking on Yukihana. The kimono was a family treasure and should be in a damned museum, Becky thought. It wasn't fit for wearing in public, especially around people unfamiliar with the warped culture of her family. If people paid close attention, they would notice the ghost lights hovering above the water, and when the light hit it just right, the weave shimmered, revealing ghoulish faces beneath the surface. When asked, Becky always said the souls were fireflies, feigning ignorance. Fireflies aren't blue, and they don't look like they're actually made of fire. No one who noticed the faces in the water ever asked. Those people usually kept their distance. The garment was morbid. Everything about her village was fixated on death. The legend of the shrine that brought the town most of its fame, the Shrine of the Three Maidens, was about the murder of 3 young women and their revenge after death. Girls from the 3 families that descended from the lines of the 3 danced at the festival in their honor every year. It hadn't been until Becky was much older that she realized that the girls were reenacting those grisly deaths with serene looks on their faces and graceful flicks of the wrist. When they at last arrived at the Hyuga mansion, they were led in ceremoniously by a member of the lower branch of the clan and led to the dining hall. Seiichiro told Becky to wait outside while he spoke briefly with Hiyashi and left her on the cobbles outside. Becky looked down at the bouquet of sunflowers she had bought Hinata. What had she been thinking? It was good manners to bring a gift, but a well-bred girl like her might think receiving a crop item offensive. It was just when she had been shopping, Becky thought that Hinata's name kind of reminded her of the sunny blooms. That being said, Becky was a moron and this girl was bound to be smarter than her. Panic began to set in. Her eyes darted around the courtyard and she spotted some thick magnolia bushes on the other side of the reflecting pool. Becky turned tail and darted for them. Bringing no gift was probably less offensive than giving her a bouquet of stupid farm flowers. Becky was not used to the restrictive layers of the kimono, nor the measured weight of the geta. She knew she would be in trouble even before she heard the crack. Hinata had just finished getting ready. She was in her lucky lilac kimono with dainty white butterflies on it. She had put her hair up in a pretty comb Naruto had bought her and was feeling anxious but ready to meet her new charge. She was walking toward the dining hall when she saw a blonde girl in a dark kimono running toward her with a bundle in her arms. Hinata watched in shock as the girl's geta snapped and she tumbled face first into the reflecting pond. Instinctively, Hinata rushed forward to fish her out the water. She barely remembered to throw her sleeves behind her as she pulled the girl onto the paved path. "Are you all right?" Hinata asked, the adrenaline giving her voice a slight quaver. I'm fine. Other than the fact that my dad is going to make me commit seppuku," Becky sighed. "Why would he do that?" Hinata asked. "Because I've probably ruined this stupid kimono that's been in the family for generations and I told him not to let me wear it because I ruin everything and I knew this would be the next casualty of my bad luck." It's just a little water," Hinata thought aloud. "If we get it taken care of in time we might be able to save it." "Come on." Hinata pulled her toward the building where all of the garments were tended to. If anyone could save that kimono, it was wise old ladies that tended to the Hyuga's priceless kimono collection. Becky flushed with shame and stayed silent through most of the process. She was peeled like an orange and given one of Hinata's yukata to change into. She clutched onto a soggy bundle the whole time, chastising herself. "I am going to make one hell of an impression," Becky muttered. "On whom?" Hinata asked. "I'm supposed to meet the heiress of the clan tonight, and here I am making an ass out of myself and borrowing her clothes," Becky sighed, flopping her arms in defeat. "Why were you running in this priceless kimono?" one of the women asked as she hung Becky's kimono on a rack with the speed and precision of a master. "I bought Hinata these sunflowers because her name has sun in it, but then I realized what a stupid idea that was and I was trying to stash them in the bushes so no one would know, and now, Becky stopped and buried her face in her hands, grunting in frustration. Hinata couldn't help but smile. It just so happens that sunflowers are my favorite. Becky looked up at her in shock and awe. Nice to meet you, Tsukimori Becky, Hinata smiled. I'm Hyuga Hinata. Seiichiro had walked home hundreds of miles, in full armor, with a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a sprained ankle after the last ninja war. He had lived through 2 of the longest and most severe winters in Getsugakur history, when a fifth of their village succumbed to the elements. It took all of the discipline he had developed over the course of his harsh 35 years to keep himself from blowing a gasket in front of Hiyashi. Becky had disappeared from the dining hall, making Seiichiro look like a fool when he tried to present her. She finally was led back by the heiress of the clan herself. Becky was in a borrowed yukata, her mother's priceless kimono nowhere to be seen. Seiichiro's mind immediately began running through all the possibilities of hows and whys, and none of them were good. Unless there were orphans about to march in that she saved from drowning, Becky was in trouble. She saw me coming toward the dining hall and was heading over to greet me when her geta snapped, Hinata explained. She fell into the reflecting pool, so we had to rush her to the garment house to save that priceless family heirloom. Hinata bowed and Becky followed suit. We apologize for our tardiness, Hinata and Becky said in unison. They've rehearsed this, Seiichiro grimaced to himself. Accidents happen, Hiyashi shrugged graciously. Seiichiro took Hiyashi's lead and heaved a sigh. Yes they do. Let's have dinner, girls. Seiichiro walked away from the compound feeling bittersweet. After the kimono debacle, Becky had used her best manners. Even he had been impressed. It was as if the initial embarrassment had set her straight and she was the ultra-perfect daughter for the rest of the night. She had reserved her speech for when it was appropriate, and when she spoke it was witty and almost insightful. Seiichiro had liked Hiyashi from the get-go, and dinner confirmed his belief that Becky would be in a household that aligned itself with traditional beliefs. She would not be running wild under that man's watch. Hinata was also a breath of fresh air. She had all the demure qualities he hoped would rub off on Becky, but also a maternal kindness and understanding towards his wayward daughter. Becky would be in good hands, he was sure of it. He just was not so sure how well he would handle having his daughter out of his sight for that long. For king and country, Seiichiro thought bitterly. Hinata and Becky sat on the foot of the bed in Becky's new room. They had both changed into their pajamas and were settling in before they went to sleep. Thanks for saving my bacon out there, Becky gave her a grateful smile. Hinata chuckled. To save your bacon you would have had to have done something wrong. It's not your fault your geta broke. That's true, but thanks anyway. Becky looked around. So is this whole house yours? One of the perks of being an heiress, I suppose, Hinata smiled sadly. I don't know, to me it would be too lonely, Becky shuffled a little. It's supposed to be full of children and visitors, Hinata sighed. Well, you're one person toward that goal, Becky smiled. You must be exhausted, Becky, Hinata rose. I'll let you get some rest. I guess I'll see you in the morning. Yeah, have a good night, Hinata. Becky watched her leave. Good night, Becky, Hinata said as she closed the door. Becky sat alone in her room staring out the window. The moon was half full and casting a soft glow on the grounds outside. The gardens were as beautiful by moonlight as they had been during the day. It surprised Becky that even at this hour there was still some bustle within the compound. It's like living in a tiny town within the village, Becky thought. The knowledge that she wasn't the only person still awake comforted her and helped her not to feel so isolated. Hinata was much nicer than she had expected. She had been kind and helpful even though Becky had made a total ass of herself. Becky also couldn't help but notice how damn pretty she was. Usually, heiresses were born of political arrangements, and so the two parties weren't always the most attractive. Somehow, Though, Hinata had come from genes that boasted both flawless hair and a killer frame. In a weird way, Becky liked Hiyashi, too. Hiyashi had the same gruff formality her father did, from his disapproving look all the way to their matching frowns. Becky expected to adjust well. Becky curled into the fresh soft sheets and breathed deeply. They smelled like sunshine and lavender and were some blend of angel's hair and satin. Exhaustion hit Becky like a sock full of nickels laying in that ridiculously comfortable bed, and it was hard to keep her eyes open. In spite of her history of handling much more strenuous journeys, Becky was all tuckered out. She figured it was the emotional trauma of almost destroying her mother's kimono and humiliating herself in front of her new guardians. As she drifted off, Becky hugged her pillow and smiled. She couldn't wait for tomorrow so she could go exploring in the hidden leaf. Hinata hovered in the hallway a moment. She had wanted to stay up and keep talking to Becky, but the poor girl looked as haggard as a corpse. She had to admit it was nice to have someone else in the house, even if it was a stranger. Naruto's absence had initially been a gnawing emptiness that followed her around wherever she went, however it had finally subsided into a dull ache. Hinata missed him terribly, but she was optimistic about her new roommate. Becky had an unassuming quality about her, a sincerity that reminded her of some of her favorite people. Naruto was like that, and so was Neji. The thing that made her most excited to have Becky around was that unlike the other girls in town, Becky seemed to have some of the same experiences with sacrificing for family and duty. The other girls always went out of their way to be nice to her, but deep down she knew that they could never fully understand her. How can a wild hare understand the trials of Lap Rabbit who has never been able to run free? That being said, Hinata knew better than to be careless. It would take some time, but Becky was someone she would grow to confide in. Hinata walked down the hallway to her room and hoped that maybe she hadn't put the two of them too far apart. She had picked Becky's room hoping for privacy, but now she worried the other girl might think that she was purposely putting distance between them. No, Hinata, she thought to herself. Don't overthink this. You gave her arguably the best room in the house. She'll see the other rooms. She'll know what you were thinking. Hinata stopped and smiled to herself. Becky would understand what she had been thinking. She didn't have to worry so much. With that thought in mind, Hinata climbed into bed, hugged the picture of Naruto she kept at her bedside, and curled up to go to sleep. Either Becky isn't an early riser or she is very tired, Hinata thought as the clock struck 10. Most members of the Hyuga household were up around 6 or 7. Her father usually rose around 4:30. Hinata had slept into an unheard of 7:30 and had been puttering around the kitchen for the last 2.5 hours, afraid to do anything lest she might disturb her guest. She had wanted to have breakfast with her new roommate, but had gotten too hungry and eaten a bowl of rice porridge about an hour ago. She finally started to hear some movement upstairs and went into the fridge to get out the ingredients for pancakes. Becky came thudding downstairs looking like something that had died and risen during the night. She had at least enough wherewithal to brush her hair before she came down, but she still looked absolutely haggard. Her skin was more pallid than Hinata had thought. Veins showed blue beneath Becky's ashen flesh, and her eyes had a glazed-over quality that made Hinata wonder if she was sleepwalking. So I should make a pot of coffee. Hinata gave her a look of concern. Yes please. Becky yawned and took a seat at the kitchen table. Oh, you're making breakfast. You don't have to. Oh, I just thought that you wouldn't know your way around yet. Hinata smiled, worry still etched on her face from the frightening appearance of her ward. Are you alright with pancakes? I love pancakes. Becky smiled. So does everyone in the compound get up early? Yes, I suppose other people would think it's early. We usually get up around 6 or 7, Hinata explained. So I can't stay up all hours of the night. Becky gave her a mischievous look. As long as you aren't playing loud music or anything I don't think anyone will mind, Hinata said. Okay. Good to know, Becky yawned. I'm kind of a night owl. Aren't all Getsu nin, though? Hinata asked. Becky edged her head. Why would you think that? Oh no, Hinata thought. I went and said something offensive. She should never so foolishly have made such an assumption. I just thought, with the whole moon thing. Not my dad. He's Mr. Rise with the dawn, Becky grumbled. In Getsu or out of it, he's shaking me awake just shy of daybreak. My father is that way as well. Hinata flipped the flawless silver dollar pancakes. So, Becky started to braid her hair self-consciously. What should we do today? I was thinking I could take you on a tour of the village. Hinata started to stack the pancakes on a simple white porcelain plate that probably cost more than all of Becky's clothes put together. So you could get your bearings. That sounds good to me, Becky said as Hinata handed her a steaming stack of hotcakes. These look awesome. Thanks, Hinata smiled. They're Naruto's. Oh, never mind. Who's Naruto? Becky had inevitably taken the bait. Hinata felt herself flush. She had wanted to avoid having this awkward conversation so soon. It always brought up uncomfortable questions about how young they had become engaged, which led to questions of why they had become engaged. The silence was stretching palpably and Hinata knew she had to say something. Uzumaki Naruto is my fiancé. Hinata pinched her arm behind her back to help steel her nerves. He's away on a long-term training mission. Oh, Becky shrugged and then looked up from her plate. Wait, you aren't having any. I already ate, Hinata smiled. Of course. Becky had been taught diplomats' manners. She understood it was impolite to pry. Hinata put a cup of coffee down in front of each of them. Do you take cream or sugar? Just a little cream. Becky held out her cup. A knock at the kitchen door interrupted their conversation. Come in, Hinata called over her shoulder. Neji walked through the door and immediately began to speak. Good morning, Lady Hinata and. He paused for a moment, stunned to silence by the sheer awfulness of Becky's morning appearance. After I have my coffee I look about 60% more human, Becky offered a generous grin. Are you naturally that? Neji's voice trailed off, lost for words. Pale. Yeah. 7 generations of deep woods and mountain dwellers. Becky took a sip of her coffee. Tsukimori Becky. Hyuga Neji, he replied, remembering his manners. We're cousins, Hinata explained. His father and my father were twins. Twins are cool, Becky said. I wish I'd been a twin. Would have made it much easier to manage everything. Do you have any siblings, Becky? Hinata inquired. No, it's just me and my dad. Becky sipped her coffee again. I have a friend in Getsu that I practically shared a cradle with. That's close to a sister, I suppose. I have a little sister, Hanabi. Hinata finally sipped her own cup. We'll probably run into her later. Cool. Becky swirled the dregs of her mug. So, girly sleepovers are on the table. Hinata sighed. Hanabi would love that. Join us. Becky waved Neji over, gesturing to an empty seat at the table. Neji sat down cautiously, as though he were afraid Becky would turn into the undead at any moment. So what are your plans for the day? I was going to show Becky around the village, Hinata clarified. Would you like some company? Neji offered. Hinata felt unsure and cast Becky a questioning glance. It was hard to tell how she would feel. After all, the girl had been basically dropped off into a compound full of one big family. Hinata imagined she would feel isolated and out of place. Instead of looking uncomfortable, however, Becky smiled good-naturedly, the color finally coming back to her skin. Sure. The more the merrier. 20 minutes later they were leaving the compound and headed for Main Street. Becky, I just realized, you're not really wearing a kunai bag, Hinata commented, perplexed. Oh, yeah, it's just printed on my leggings. Becky smiled. I'm off duty but it's weird not seeing the bag strap while I'm out, you know. Neji glanced at Hinata from behind Becky's back with a look of disbelief. So you're wearing clothes that look like you're wearing gear but you aren't, Neji phrased his question as a statement. Exactly. Becky grinned obliviously. That makes perfect sense, Neji said, his sarcasm so seamless it was downright undetectable. Hinata laughed nervously and they kept moving along. Good-natured she may be, but Becky left a lot to be desired in terms of her kunoichi habits. So that big building over there is the Hokage's mansion. Back beyond it is the mountain with all the great Hokage's faces carved into it, Neji explained. Oh, there's the flower shop I went to yesterday, Becky gestured to the store across the street. The Yamanaka clan owns that shop, Hinata added. One of my old classmates, Ino, usually runs it. Was she the blonde one without any pupils? Becky asked. Yes, Hinata replied uncomfortably. Okay, does she have an ocular jutsu like your clan? Becky asked. I know that's why you guys don't have pupils, but does everybody here without pupils have an ocular jutsu? The Hyugas stood there in silence looking at her in horror. Hinata noticed that Neji's jaw had actually dropped a half an inch, and the usually composed shinobi was staring at Becky in open-mouthed dismay. He caught Hinata's gaze, realized his loss of composure, and snapped his mouth closed. Becky, you can't just ask why people don't have pupils, Neji whispered in exasperation. Sorry, ocular jutsu aren't a thing where I'm from, Becky shuffled uncomfortably. The Kek Genkai are usually a lot less apparent. You can't tell so easily what people have by looking at them. You know where we should go. Neji cut her off, his voice full of forced enthusiasm. We should go to the school. Hinata heard what he really meant and cringed, mostly because she agreed. We need professional help for this level of stupid. As they walked, they very gently probed Becky's brain to see just how backwater she was. So, you lived in Getsugakure? Neji probed. Hinata noticed that he kept Becky at a distance. She wondered if he was afraid her ignorance was contagious. I went to academy there, so sort of, Becky scratched her head. The village I was born and raised in is about 60 miles further inland. It's up in a mountain pass in the woods. Oh, how many families live in your village? Hinata smiled. Well, there's like 6 clans, Becky kicked at the road. Wait. No, 5. 5 clans. There were 6, but I'm the last so. I'm a girl, though, so the family dies with me. Does your village have a specialty in terms of production or jutsu? Neji asked. Well, we're Getsu, so everything's kinda moon and water based, Becky replied. We have like a 500-year-old shrine. That's kind of the village's only noteworthy attraction. Oh, what's it a shrine to? Hinata asked. It's so old no one really knows what it was originally built to honor, Becky explained. A lot of the paintings are kind of waterlogged and the statues are decayed. If you believe the traditions passed down through the Miko, it's a gate to keep hell at bay, or something. And if you don't believe the Miko? Neji asked. Well, one way or another about 300 years ago it was rededicated to these 3 shrine maidens who were murdered protecting a wounded spirit who took refuge there. Becky continued. It had the power to grant wishes, and some bandits heard about it attacked the shrine. The head priestess and 2 of her attendants held them off long enough for everyone else to escape. They had reached the school. It was right around lunchtime. Neji turned and looked at the girls. Sorry Becky, this is really interesting but I have to try to catch the teacher before class starts again. Neji started to walk inside. I'll go in for a moment and see if I can borrow a book for you Becky. That's really nice of him. Becky turned to Hinata. Your cousin is really nice, Hinata. He sure is, Hinata smiled back, knowing if Becky understood his intentions she wouldn't be so pleased. Is she really this dense? No, she can't be this dense, Hinata thought. There's no way a kunoichi could live this long with 0 street smarts. 10 minutes later Neji emerged from the school with a book in hand. This textbook is the standard one they use to teach trainees at the academy. It covers a lot of the sorts of questions it sounds like you have about our village. What he left out was that it was for very young recruits, the equivalent of shinobi kindergarten and first grade. It didn't cover any jutsu, other than the section that nebulously explained what a jutsu was and how they worked in basic, kid-friendly terms. This is great, Neji, thanks. Becky beamed and cracked it open, looking at the full-color pictures as excitedly as the kindergarteners. Neji had to resist the urge to roll his eyes. Uruka-sensei said if there was ever something you were really confused about, you could sit in one of his classes on the subject. Neji said. Everyone in this village is so nice. I don't think I've been to a village where everyone is this nice. Becky smiled, pouring through the textbook. I would have never expected this kind of courtesy from Leaf Nin. What's that supposed to mean? Neji asked, affronted. Well, I mean, per capita your village has the most notorious nin in the bingo book. Becky started to count off on her fingers. Uchiha Itachi, Orochimaru, the copycat ninja. Half of those are Ronin, Neji interrupted, his courtesy slipping. Do you know what other villages do with notorious Ronin? Becky's eyes flashed. They have highly trained hit squads that take them out before they're a problem. Have you ever heard of a notorious Getsu Ronin? No, maybe that's because statistically they participate in too few missions to become notorious, or, Neji's voice trailed off. Hinata was gently shaking her head at him, indicating it wasn't worth the argument. First-hand accounts of foreign nin passing through Konoha or in the field indicate that before he left Konoha for good, Orochimaru had been suspected of conducting all kinds of gross experiments, and that the third Hokage had several opportunities to stop him. Becky clearly saved her brain for debates like this. 2 minutes ago, Neji had wondered how the girl figured out how to put her pants on straight, but now she spoke with the eloquence and confidence of a seasoned pro. When I was 3, there was this field op, I'll leave out his name. It's unimportant. Becky closed the book and tucked it under her arm. She watched her feet as she spoke, the memory uncomfortable to recount. He had started acting funny, saying off stuff, like the job was finally getting to him. He mutilated an enemy nin's body in the field. My dad got called in on a special meeting. He went to talk to the guy. Found him with the dismembered body of one of his squadmates. My dad took him down with one swing of his kanabo, right then and there. Becky looked Neji dead in the eye. That's why little villages don't have all these escaped psychopaths. We see them turn and we take them down before they get loose and ruin families. Hinata stepped forward and put a hand gently on Neji's arm. Weren't you supposed to meet Lee for training today? Neji looked at her, his brows knit with confusion. His eyes widened when he realized she was giving him the opportunity for a graceful exit. Oh, of course, he said half under his breath. How could I have forgotten? If you'll excuse me, ladies. Neji bowed politely and took his leave. Hinata turned to Becky with a look of concern that almost broke into a fit of laughter. Becky's stern face had morphed into a comical expression of childish rage. Her cheeks were puffed up as she glared after Neji. Forget what I said, he isn't nice. Hinata shifted uncomfortably. Well, he's just very loyal to the village, and some of what you said might be hard to swallow. I guess that was kind of insensitive of me, but do you guys even know what the other villages think about you guys? Becky flipped through the book. You mean about the Ronin? Hinata knew it was true. Konoha had produced many legendary nin, good and bad. In the last Shinobi War, you guys participated in the extermination of an entire enemy village. Becky closed the book, unable to find what she was looking for. To the little villages, the Big Five are kind of just a bunch of blustering bullies. Hinata had started to walk. Her hope was that getting Becky moving would blow off some steam. She would have to talk to Neji later and see if there was a way to reconcile him with Becky. Hinata would hate for discord to be sown on Becky's first day in Konoha. They walked through town, Hinata pointing out all of the relevant points of interest. The aviary, the market, weapons shops, and so on. They stopped to eat at one of the local diners and ran into Sakura. Hey, Hinata, Sakura greeted them. And this is Tsukimori Becky, Hinata said. Her father is the ambassador for Getsugakur. I'm her garden escort throughout the duration of the talks between our villages. Nice to meet you, Becky bowed politely. Haruno Sakura, she smiled. Welcome to our village. Once their food had arrived, Becky tucked into it. Long day, Sakura chuckled. This is a lot larger of a village than I'm used to running around in, Becky sighed. I swear we haven't even seen half the town. We saw most of the important parts, Hinata explained. As other things come up, you'll at least have some landmarks to direct yourself with. That's true, Becky said. Hey, you guys don't mind if I run by the Hokage's mansion to see my dad? I'll meet back up with you at the compound. I should really go with you, Hinata started. Becky had already put down the money for her food and was halfway out the door. Don't worry, I'll be fine, she waved behind her as she left. Hinata watched her uncomfortably. She was torn between her duty and Becky's wishes, however all she could think about was losing her charge. Hinata gave Becky a 5-minute start, paid for her own food, and followed after her. Becky flew through the streets gleefully as she made her way to the Hokage's mansion. She was so proud of herself for remembering her way around. She had so much to tell her father. Although Hinata had pointed it out, Becky hadn't visited the Hokage's mansion yet. There were guards everywhere, but none of them seemed to mind her until she approached the steps. Hi, excuse me, I'm wondering if Tsukimori Seichiro is in a meeting with the Hokage. Becky asked the tall gloomy-looking one at the foot of the steps. Who's asking? The guard said, eyeing her over. Tsukimori Becky, his daughter. Becky fished out her family's crest from under her shirt. It was an intricately carved crescent moon and maple leaves on a block of silver mounted on a leather tag. The guard eyeballed it for a moment before speaking. Yeah, they've been at it for the last 6 hours. They're not agreeing about something. Do you think he'll be out soon? She asked. He shook his head. No, ma'am. If you're still on duty when he leaves, please let him know I came by. Becky bowed and took her leave, disappointment dragging at her feet. The exhaustion was catching up with her again. Becky trudged along under the setting sun as she made her way back to the Hyuga compound. What a day it had been. She had gotten a good feel for the village and probably ruined a potential friendship along the way. For all her training under her father, Becky's temper always kicked in at the worst moments. Neji and Hinata were clearly close, but Becky had to go and get up on her soapbox and make an enemy out of him. Becky wished she could have a jutsu that let her rewind the last 10 minutes so she could undo the damage she had caused. Then again, knowing herself, she would probably just use that jutsu to refine her argument rather than avoid it. When she arrived at the gates, Becky bowed and greeted the gatekeeper and made her way back to Hinata's house. Hinata wasn't home yet, so Becky found her way to the study and curled up on the loveseat to read her history of Konohagakure. 25 pages in, around the time Hashirama finally founded the village, Becky was out cold. Hinata came in to find her asleep with the book on her face. Hinata saved her spot with a bookmark with puppies on it, then threw a blanket over her. Hinata turned out the light and left Becky to sleep. Hinata had cried herself to sleep enough times on that couch to know it was comfortable enough for her guest. The next morning Becky rose around 8 and met Hinata downstairs. There were scrambled eggs still hot in the pan and fresh bread out to be toasted. Becky made herself a plate and took up a spot next to Hinata at the table. Thank you for breakfast, Becky said as she scooped up her first furkful. Of course, Hinata said as she read the paper. So, I had a question. The book said that there was a really long gap between the 4th and 5th Hokage. What digs? Becky wanted to talk to her about the fight with Neji, but she figured it was better to segue in on something less controversial. Oh, If you keep reading it will explain after the fourth passed, the third took up office again, Hinata explained. So it went third, fourth, third, fifth? Becky asked. Yes, Hinata answered. Becky's eyes narrowed as she thought about it. That sounded fairly suspicious to her. Why wouldn't they just skip from the fourth to the fifth? The third Hokage sounded like one shady dealer to her. The book also talks a lot about the will of fire. Becky moved her food around on her plate. What is it? The will of fire is essentially a Konoha ninja's strength to fight against all odds, their uprightness of character, and their responsibility to carry on the hopes and dreams of their predecessors, Hinata recited from memory. When she was a girl, it hadn't made sense to her. It was the sort of thing that the teachers had them rehearse over and over again until it was as automatic a response as their own name. After spending time with Naruto, however, she had fully come to understand what all those words really symbolized. His strength gave her strength. It was how she convinced herself to get up every morning and face the day, even in the absence of her one true love. Do you have anything like that in Getsu? Hinata mused. Not really. Becky leaned back in her chair. I mean, everything is inherited there, from government positions to land titles, so I suppose you could say it falls back on whatever your family's code is. What's your family's code? The idea intrigued Hinata. Even before Becky had a chance to respond, Hinata found herself trying to figure out what the Hyuga's family words would be. Probably something about tradition. Becky thought about it for a moment before responding. I told you before I'm the last in line of the Aso family. If their code was worth a damn, I wouldn't be the last one. On the Tsukimori side I'm a third son's daughter, so their code is probably the smarter of the two. Becky pushed around her eggs some more. It's a lot of nonsense about not besmirching the family honor and not yielding to your enemies, ever. Nothing super inspiring. Hinata watched Becky for a while. The two sat silently as they tried to figure out what the other was thinking. Hinata clenched her fists under the table and took an unprecedented first move. Do you want to talk about what happened yesterday? Becky swallowed hard. Hinata was her age, but she was being so mature about yesterday's scuffle. Becky had been mentally prepared for a screaming match or the cold shoulder, anything but this. Hinata was being respectful. Her tone was measured and open, inviting a response and showing no criticism. It made Becky feel even worse about what an ass she'd made of herself. I'm kind of sensitive about the whole Ronin thing, Becky started slowly. When she took too long to respond, Hinata offered. I noticed. Do you want to talk to me about it? In the expectant silence that followed, Becky was forced to fill it with something. She supposed she did owe Hinata, and maybe even Neji, an explanation. There are Kek Genkei on both sides of my family. The Tsukimori Kek Genkei has all but died out. My father is the first in 3 generations that even shows signs of maybe having some of it, Becky explained. My mother was the most powerful user of her family's Kek in possibly the entire history of her family. When word got out that they'd had a baby, Orochimaru's men came to take me away. My mother died holding them off while my father got me to safety. Becky, I'm so sorry, Hinata said, her voice full of compassion. I lost my mother young, too. I know how hard that is. Yeah, I'm sorry too. Becky looked up from her almost untouched breakfast. I shouldn't have lashed out at you and Neji. I need to have more of an open mind about all this. If I'm going to be living here in Konoha, I need to set aside my biases. I don't want to make things unpleasant for your family. You all have been nothing but nice to me and I'm just dragging my baggage through your flower beds. If you want we can go see Neji so you two can talk it out, Hinata suggested. Becky shuffled uncomfortably. Neji seemed the stoic type to her. She hoped he wouldn't hold a grudge, but then again, she'd made this problem and it was up to her to face the fallout. Whether I want or not, it's the right thing to do, Becky almost choked on the words. She hated taking the high ground, especially when things were her fault. Part of her just wanted everyone to forget about it and move on, but that mindset would only make things worse in the long run. I was thinking I should go around the compound and introduce you to the family. Hinata turned a page of the paper thoughtfully. If you're up for it. Becky tried not to let it show, but the idea of more introductions and remembering gave her a headache. Sure, I'll need to get presentable first. Becky rose from the table, guiltily dumping her uneaten breakfast down the garbage disposal. She hated to waste the food, but the morning's conversations had nerfed her appetite. Of course, Hinata smiled understandingly. She was glad that Becky wanted to fix things. Part of her had been worried that Becky was a spoiled pompous ambassador's daughter. Hinata had been mortified for her when she went on her little tirade in the street. Then again, Becky had made a few fair points. Perhaps it was the stubbornness that came with the will of fire that pushed even the worst of Konoha ninja to great heights. Terrible, but great. Hinata led Becky around the grounds of the Hyuga compound. They met all of the pertinent people in both the main house and the branch house. So Hinata, I know this is totally insensitive, but it's killing me, Becky whispered harshly. What's the difference between the main house and the branch house? Hinata sighed. Growing up in the compound, one forgot the confusion the division might cause. She should have thought to brief her earlier. Hina-chan, you're going to have to do a better job explaining it than that. Becky gave her the side eye. I'm not that oblivious. They're branded. What's the deal? Hinata blushed and looked around. Even though she couldn't see anyone, she knew the possibility of interlopers loomed over them. They'd known each other 2 days and Becky had already given her a pet name. None of the other girls in town called her a pet name, not even Naruto had a pet name for her. Was this typical for girls their age? Or was it just Becky's battering ram personality? I'll explain all the technical aspects later. Hinata dropped her voice to the squeak of a mouse. It's not something to be openly discussed. Oh, Becky tossed her hair and looked around. Look where we ended up. Their last stop, around lunch, was back at the garment storehouse. I figured you would want to check on your kimono, Hinata smiled. You were right. Let's go see. Becky skipped inside. The girls entered the building and chatted up the wise women of the storehouse. We have a gift for you, one of them giggled as she handed Becky a long box. Becky peeked inside to see her mother's kimono back in perfect condition and wrapped in fine linen. The linen is to keep it preserved, one of the others offered. There's a lot of moisture this time of year. This is wonderful. Thank you all so much for your help, Becky beamed. They had kept the kimono similarly stored, but they had done something to it to bring it back to life. Suddenly the kimono wasn't a drab antique, it was a living, breathing thing. The ghost lights flickered in the sunshine and stars she had never noticed before sparkled in the night sky. We figured you would want to keep it in Lady Hinata's house with you, another said. Yes, thank you. Becky couldn't stop smiling. What did you all do to it? It looks fresh off the rack. The youngest of the women winked at her. Hyuga family secret. As they carried the box back to the house, Hinata reviewed the names and positions of all the family members she had introduced to Becky that day. Okay. So Amiko is the older cook and Mio is the younger cook, Becky repeated, doing her best to retain all the new information. Hinata caught something white and black darting off out of sight up ahead. Her eyes narrowed. Hinata, what's wrong? Becky squinted up ahead. What do your Hyuga eyes see? Hyuga Neji, you come out right now. Hinata called out up ahead. She was startled by the sound of her raised voice. She didn't know she could be that loud. Hinata felt her throat afterwards. The strain of yelling would probably leave her vocal cords sore for a few days. Then again, she was surprised and simultaneously angry at Neji for trying to avoid them. Begrudgingly, he stepped out onto the path ahead of them and waited awkwardly for them to catch up. I was not avoiding you, I know what you're thinking, Neji spat out as soon as they got close. I just suddenly remembered I forgot something. Hinata suddenly lost her nerve. She had wanted to have Becky and Neji reconcile, but now that she had brought them together, she was at a loss for how to proceed. An uncomfortable silence was stretching out between the three, when all at once Neji and Becky blurted out at the same time. "Look, I'm really sorry, what I said was out of line. I let my pride get in the way and I spoke disrespectfully." They stopped, fell silent and stared each other down. "Go ahead." "No, you go ahead. I insist. I was interrupting you." "Okay. I'm sorry. I forget that I'm a guest in the Leaf Village now, and that even though we're all friends I should mind what I say," Becky sighed. "I just got here, and I'm all turned around. There was probably a better way for me to express my thoughts." After giving the situation some thought, I realized the same thing. I shouldn't have taken offense. Everyone has said things they don't quite mean when they're tired or nervous. Neji bowed. "I apologize. I'll accept yours if you'll accept mine," Becky offered. "Sounds like a deal." Neji nodded. After Neji briefly updated Hinata on the goings-on around Konoha that day, the girls returned back to the Hinata's house. Hinata took up some of her knitting while Becky read her textbook. "Hinata, what did you guys have to do to graduate the academy?" Becky asked as she turned a page. For the third time in 2 days, Hinata was left wondering how much she could safely divulge to Becky without breaking shinobi disclosure laws. She had dodged explaining the difference between the branch and main houses of her clan, but it was hard to avoid a question like this. She thought for a moment, and decided on a vague version of the facts. "Well, there's a written exam, and then trainees have to demonstrate the ability to use a very basic ninjutsu." Becky knit her brows as she thought. Hinata hated to think so, but the expression Becky made when she was puzzled gave her the appearance it took a great deal of power for her to think through things. It was as if it took all of her concentration and willpower to process new information. "I guess that's not that different from Getsu," Becky said at last. "Instead of ninjutsu test, they drop us off in the middle of nowhere in the mountains or in the woods. We have to work our way back to town. Does a lot of your class graduate?" Hinata wondered. That seemed harsher than what they had Konoha trainees do. "Did they give you supplies?" "It's a basic kit. Flint rock, rope, a couple of kunai, a water canteen, and some rations," Becky explained. "It took me 2 days. Some kids they had to go out and find after day 4. I'd say it's 50-50 on how many of us graduate. The students that don't make the cut go back to school and can try again in 3 months, so no real repercussions." The girls chatted a bit longer about their experiences in the academy. A few hours later, they went to the dining hall for dinner. They ate with Hanabi before returning to Hinata's and settling in for bed. Becky was glad both her kimono was fixed and that she had worked things out with Neji. If more of the Konoha shinobi were like him and Hinata, she thought there was a good chance she could adapt to life here in the long run. Becky rose earlier than the day before. She was groggy and irritable, but she was starting to adjust to the early schedule of the Hyuga. She brushed and braided her hair in the vanity mirror and splashed her face with cold water. She was pale as death right after waking up, as usual. She put on black leggings and a gray tunic and headed downstairs barefoot. Hinata had started the pot of coffee and was making rice porridge. "Good morning, Becky," Hinata called over her shoulder. "Morning, Hinata," Becky replied as she took her seat at the table. "I forgot to ask you, what kind of food do you typically eat for breakfast and lunch?" Hinata had been worrying about what she had been feeding her guest. Hinata typically made food she had grown up eating in Konoha. She needed to make sure that there wasn't something she was being culturally insensitive about. "Oh, anything is fine really. I'm not picky," Becky smiled slightly, the weight of the morning keeping her friendliness in check. "I'll eat whatever is put in front of me. I was just thinking if there was anything specific you would like the kitchen to stock, I could let them know." Hinata explained. You know, any favorite fruits or vegetables, that sort of thing. Okay, if I think of anything I'll tell you, Becky said as cracked open her textbook. You've been studying hard, Hinata commented. Ever since Neji had put the book in her hand, Hinata hadn't seen Becky without it. Anytime there was a spare minute, she had her nose buried in it. Things are just so different here, Becky said. I'd like to stop making such an ass of myself all the time. Knowing about Konoha's history will hopefully help with that. I wish I'd had one of these for every major village I've been to. Would have saved my dad a lot of heartache. I'm glad you are taking the initiative. People will notice the effort, Hinata said as she doled out the coffee and porridge. Regardless, people here are pretty friendly. So long as you make a point of being friendly to them, they'll return the favor. A thought had been nagging at Hinata for a while. Several times Hinata had slipped and brought up Naruto. Becky never seemed fazed, but Hinata was worried that she was just being polite. Becky, do you have a boyfriend? Hinata asked hesitantly. No, Becky said matter-of-factly. It's kind of hard maintaining relationships with the whole hopping around from village to village thing. Not even with someone from the village you grew up in? Hinata asked. There weren't really any boys there that liked me, Becky adjusted in her seat. On the one hand, my dad is scary as hell, so that's strike one. Strike two is that there aren't a lot of people my age in the village. Pickings are slim, and compared to the other girls my age I'm not a popular choice. Why do you think that? Hinata thought Becky was pretty enough. Her hair was a very lovely color and she kept it in complicated braids. Then again, Hinata didn't know what the other girls in Becky's village looked like. Maybe they all had hair that color. Probably my temper. Becky looked up at the ceiling as she thought about it. Oh, or the fact that I don't want to get married at like 17, and have 7 kids and never see anything beyond my village. Oh, was all Hinata could reply with. That sounds sad. Remember how I said there are only 5 clans left in my village? Well, they all come from the same 3 lines. There are 3 offshoot clans now, but essentially we're all distantly related, right? Becky thought for a moment about whether or not she should continue. She shrugged and kept talking. So that means of the 4 boys around my age from Kami to Akuma, 3 of them are my first cousins. That definitely puts a damper on things. Hinata took a bite of her porridge. So, do you all meet your spouses in Getsugakur? Sometimes. Becky eyed her carefully, as if surveying whether or not Hinata could handle the next part. See, my clan, and at least 2 of the other clans, think it's totally okay to marry a second cousin. Hinata's eyes widened in surprise, to which Becky rolled hers. Come on. By the look of your entire clan, tell me that no one around here has married a cousin. Hinata thought about it and had to admit that she could think of at least 3 marriages that had happened between cousins in her family, but they were usually at least 3rd or 4th cousins. She stammered for a moment in frustration at Becky's satisfied smirk before she finally said. They aren't so closely related. Well, regardless of my dad's position as a 3rd son making my prospects few to none, he didn't want me stuck there, Becky continued, as if they hadn't just discussed the ethics of marrying cousins. Unfortunately, likely at some point he's going to have to use me as a bargaining chip and broker me into a marriage that would profit Getsu. Hinata looked down at her plate. There was a very good chance that if she hadn't become engaged to Naruto, she would have been facing a similar fate. He had rescued her from her position as a bargaining chip. Their indiscretion had guaranteed her a lifetime full of love and happiness. When she was younger, Hinata would have never thought that doing something wrong and getting in trouble could lead to such good fortune. Maybe Becky had been put under her care so she could get her in the same kind of trouble. You might meet someone here, Hinata offered. There are a lot of boys here our age. Almost all of them are single and they're generally nice people. I don't know, Hinata. Becky tapped her thumb on the table. I don't know how long I'll be here, and as much as I would like to meet someone, maybe if the right person comes along it'll be worth the work. That's the right attitude. Hinata clapped her hands. Why did you ask though? Becky asked. Is it because you're engaged? Well, yes. Hinata blushed. I wanted to make sure you weren't in some complicated situation and I was making you uncomfortable bringing it up all the time. No, of course not. Becky shook her head. Tell me more about him. Hinata lit up like a string of lights. She talked about how brave and strong Naruto was, what good work ethic he had, his lofty goals of becoming Hokage, and how cute he was when he smiled. That is, until she noticed she had talked for 20 minutes straight and Becky was leaning back in her chair with a smug expression. You like him? Becky teased. I should. I'm marrying him, aren't I? Hinata flushed with exasperation. This goes beyond an arranged marriage, Becky poked. You like him. I have to admit, I have always admired him. Hinata's face was growing redder by the minute. Becky paused to think and the wicked smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. How is he in bed? Becky asked. Hinata froze solid and turned scarlet from head to toe. She could feel sweat dripping down the back of her neck. Oh, okay, you're shy about that. Becky waved her hands apologetically, but the smile didn't fade. Sorry I asked. Am I that easy to read? Hinata thought. I think I'm going to try to run some errands today. I have to stock up on letter paper and such now that I know I'm not heading home anytime soon. Becky rose and put her dishes in the sink. I've got important ambassadoress in training communication to conduct. See you later, Hina-chan. Hinata watched Becky skip out the front door and wondered if they really were friends. Hinata had always wanted a girlfriend, but she thought it would be like the other relationships she'd built with her teammates. There would be a build-up of hanging out briefly over lunch, then running errands together, and then the whole secret confessions of the soul could happen. She had only known Becky 3 days and she was asking her how Naruto was in bed. Was that rude? Becky now lived in the Hyuga compound, her every moment spent in a fishbowl where her only solitude was in Hinata's house. Hinata was privy to all the things Becky did and said that other people didn't see or hear. Did that make her entitled to know some of Hinata's secrets, too? If Hinata asked Becky a very personal question like that, would Becky feel so uncomfortable? Hinata finished her coffee as she mulled it over. Becky had been a little straightforward with that question, but she may have meant it jokingly. It was Hinata's own fault for opening that door when she spent 5 minutes talking about Naruto's rippling pectorals. Hinata decided when Becky got back later she would talk to her about it. Communication about feelings was very important, or at least that's what Hinata read in the relationship books she stole peeks at in the bookshops and the library. A few hours later, Hinata heard Becky coming through the front door. Hinata was in the study writing a letter to Naruto about her new roommate, the adventures they'd already shared, and just how much she missed her fiancé. Hinata, Becky cried from the kitchen. What is it, B-chan? Hinata had decided that because Becky already had started calling her Hina-chan, she would give Becky a nickname, too. I think I accidentally joined a gang, Becky said as she walked into the study. Hinata looked up to see Becky in a skin-tight green spandex suit that left nothing to the imagination. Becky had a fairly large chest, and the spandex clung to the point of indecency. It was so tight around her legs and rear that Hinata was sure if Becky was wearing underwear, she would be able to see it. Hinata had seen several men wearing that suit, unfortunately including Naruto, which was awkward enough. Seeing it on a girl was downright vulgar. Becky read the trepidation on Hinata's face and shrugged. I know, you can see like every ripple and fold everywhere, Becky shuffled. I think I'm going to have to ask if I can wear a leotard over it or something. Hinata shook her head and refocused. So you met Rock Lee then? Or Might Guy? Both. Becky shrugged. They aren't related, right? Even though they look like weird aged gap twins. That's right. Guy is Lee's sensei. He's also Neji's sensei, Hinata averted her eyes. Guy is Neji's sensei. Becky jumped a little in surprise, jiggling. No wonder he looks so grumpy all the time. There was a knock at the door and Hinata called out. Who is it? It's Neji, Lady Hinata. Speak of the devil. Becky folded her arms, for which Hinata was silently grateful. We're in the study, Hinata called out. Neji walked in, saw Becky, and stopped dead. Color rose in his cheeks and his face twitched before he composed himself enough to speak. So, you met Lee. I think I joined his gang, Becky offered. Neji shook his head and averted his eyes, suddenly aware of how revealing the green jumpsuit was on a girl. So what do you have to do to be a part of Lee's gang? Hinata asked. There was a whole lot of talk about being youthful and dashing and I don't know. Becky plopped down on the loveseat. They were so excited about it all, and it made me feel bad to rain on their parade, so I just kind of got swept along in the current. Becky, you need to learn how to say no to people here. I know you are new and you're nervous about being accepted, but no one will hate you if you turn down something. Especially something this ridiculous. Neji gestured at the jumpsuit. Please, rain on their parade. Hail on their parade so it gets cancelled. Is there a way for you to get out of his gang? Hinata asked. I don't think so, Becky said. Wait, I think he said something about a gang could only survive if it could count on its leader to always be there for them. So maybe if I don't know, needed him to help me with something and it fell through, I could get out. You might want to make that happen soon, Neji suggested. I'm supposed to go train with him later, Becky added. Hinata opened her mouth to speak but Neji shushed her gently. Let her learn this one on her own. Neji patted her shoulder. I'll be there, too. If things get too out of hand, I'll put a stop to it. If you're sure, Hinata shrugged. Neji had to carry Becky home on his back at first, but her arms were so weak she couldn't even hold onto his neck. He threw her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, an arrangement which neither was happy about. Could you not, bounce so much? Becky groaned. This is what you get for agreeing to train with someone you don't know, Neji chastised. Just leave me here to D, Becky moaned. Do you think I want to be carrying a sweaty girl in a jumpsuit tight enough to bounce a coin off through the village? No, I don't, Neji grumbled. Make this a little less unpleasant for me by not complaining so much. Thank you, Neji, Becky whimpered. He brought her through the gates of the compound, his face the image of composure in spite of his awkward cargo. Hiyashi observed the two making their way to Hinata's house and shook his head. The Tsukimori girl certainly brought her own brand of strangeness into the Hyuga compound. Neji brought her inside Hinata's kitchen and announced them. Hinata, we're back. Hinata walked into the kitchen and saw the sorry state Becky was in. Oh, you poor thing. Hinata gasped. I hurt in places I didn't know I could hurt, Becky cried pitifully. My whole body is on fire. Can you bring her upstairs? Hinata was already clamoring at the medicine cabinet. Neji heaved a sigh and headed up the stairs, Becky crying out a little with every step. Just set her on the bed, Hinata said as she came in. I'll take care of her from here. Thank you, Neji. Did we learn our lesson? Neji asked Becky as he set her on the bed. Yes, she pouted. What do we say when spandex-clad ninja asks us to train with them? Neji asked. Not today, Becky squeaked. No, Neji bopped her on the nose with his finger. No, Becky repeated. Good. Neji left the room and closed the door. Hinata looked over her incapacitated friend. Can you move on your own? She frowned. Barely, Becky whimpered. A hot soak would probably help. Hinata walked into the bathroom and started the water. Hinata, if I ever agree to do something like this again, slap me, Becky whined. All right, come on, Hinata held out her hands as she walked over to her. I'll help you get to the tub. You're a good friend, Hinata, Becky mewed as Hinata hoisted her up. Becky leaned on Hinata's shoulder all the way into the bathroom. Hinata peeled her out of the spandex while Becky leaned on the wall for support. Hinata's suspicions about Becky not wearing underthings was confirmed. She looked away from the S hovering in front of her face as she pulled the legs off one by one. Becky shimmied out of the last of the suit and stumbled for the tub. Hinata grabbed her arm to steady her and helped her get into the hot water. Becky's S floated to the top. I have that same problem, Hinata thought and then quickly pushed it from her mind. Her S weren't as large as Hinata's, but they would have most of the girls their age turning green with envy. Hinata shook her head. She shouldn't be so casual about assessing another person's body. You're okay. Hinata finally brought herself to speak. You won't drown if I walk away. No, I don't think so, Becky sighed. I will need your help getting back out. Of that I'm sure. I'm going to go make you some herbal tea. It'll keep the swelling down. Hinata said as she walked out. You're an angel, Hinata, Becky hollered after her. Hinata brewed the tea and brought it upstairs. Becky had her head leaning against the back of the tub while she soaked the soreness away. Hinata sat on the corner of the tub and handed her the tea. Becky sipped on it weakly. I might not be able to get out of bed tomorrow, Becky said grimly. If you can't, I'll come up here and keep you company, Hinata offered. We'll make Neji be our butler. Becky gave her a mischievous look. Hinata chuckled. He would probably do it, too. The girls chatted for a while until Becky started to feel baked. Hinata helped her get out of the tub and gingerly wrapped her with the towel, trying not to accidentally grope anything. Becky waddled awkwardly over to the bed, dropped the towel, and collapsed. Aren't you going to put on your pajamas? Hinata asked. Too much work, Becky groaned. So you are just going to sleep? Hinata said. Yes. Good night, Hinata. Becky's voice was muffled by the pillow she had planted her face in. And thanks for the help. Hinata walked over to pull the covers over her friend before she left. Becky was lying face down. Hinata tried not to look, but curiosity got the best of her. Becky's butt was a little larger and shapelier than her own. Hinata felt a small pang of jealousy as she pulled the sheet over Becky's curves, red as a pomegranate the whole time. She walked down the hallway to her own room and got ready for bed. She hoped Becky would feel better the next day. Overdoing it with training was a miserable risk that went with being a shinobi. It had been odd for Hinata to help Becky get cleaned up, but there was no way her friend could have done it on her own. The only other available help had been Neji, who would have been an even worse choice. Hinata took Becky's lead by not letting it bother her much. As she climbed into bed and drifted off to sleep, she caught herself hoping they would have many more, but less awkward, adventures in the near future. A few days later, Becky's father left Konoha for Getsugakur. Becky felt uncomfortable being cut off from him, but she hadn't seen Seichiro since the dinner with the Hyugas. It was just a lingering thought in the back of her mind. If something goes wrong, I'm all on my own out here. Since he was going home, she had asked him to bring some things she realized would come in handy. Hinata was excited because word had been sent ahead that Shino and Kiba were on their way home from their long-term mission. She hadn't seen her teammates in months, and for Hinata it was like being separated from brothers. She couldn't wait for them to meet Becky, but Hinata also wanted to get some time with her old friends. Hinata waited until they had been home for a couple of days for them to catch up with their families. On the day Hinata was supposed to go meet them, she baked chocolate chip cookies and little bone biscuits for Akamaru. Becky walked into the kitchen with a puzzled look on her face. Are these for something special? She asked, eyeballing the cookies. Yes, Hinata said. My squad mates have finally returned from their long-term mission. I was going to go see them this afternoon. I'll probably be out late, so you'll have to have dinner in the main house. Maybe I'll just hit up the diner or Ichiraku. Becky shrugged and stealthily snatched a cookie. I'll go study now. Holler in there when you're heading out. Happy reading. Hinata called after her. Hinata had been spending time with her teammates for the last 2 days. Becky had wandered around town trying to keep herself busy, but she didn't know many people. Without Hinata there to make introductions, Becky just floated from place to place. People thought she was just another outsider passing through. She had finished the textbook on the history of Konoha and brought it by the school shortly after it let out for the day. Becky wandered in to find the halls were empty, so she stuck her nose in a few classrooms until she found a man sitting at a desk working on what looked like grading papers. "Hi. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm looking for Aruka-sensei." Becky used her best grown-up voice, but something about being in an academy made her feel like a little kid again. This feeling betrayed her and made her voice sound like she was asking for permission. The man looked up at her and smiled pleasantly. He had an interesting scar across his nose, but Becky tried not to stare. "You've found him," he said. "Sorry, I don't believe we've met. I'm Tsukimori Becky. Hyuga Neji borrowed this on my behalf and I'm here to return it." She handed the book to him. "Oh, did you get through the whole thing already?" Aruka asked. "Yes, it's been very helpful," Becky smiled. "With the culture shock and all." "Oh," he frowned almost imperceptibly. "Are you adjusting okay? If I were to design the most teacher-wide teacher ever, it would be this guy," Becky thought. The way he looked at her, the soft but encouraging voice he used, and his kind and professional demeanor were the ideal for an academy instructor. Becky wished she had a teacher like him back when she was at the academy. Her teachers were always snippy and short with her because they felt the only reason she got a spot was her father's position as ambassador. They thought that other more deserving children had missed out on the opportunity because of good old-fashioned nepotism. It didn't matter that Becky had the endurance and pain tolerance of an adult at the age of 5. It didn't matter that she picked up skills quickly and had a naturally disarming aura. All that mattered was that they didn't like her, so they were blind to anything that made her worthy. "Yes, I'm adjusting well," Becky lied. "The Hyugas are taking good care of me and I'm making friends with some of the other kids my age." His face lit up. "Oh, really? Who have you met already?" Well, I'm staying with Hinata, so I spend most of my time around either her or Neji," Becky explained. "I've met Rock Lee and Tenten, and they're both very nice. I've met Ino and Sakura in passing. That's about it." Aruka smiled, remembering them fondly. "They're all great kids." He thought for a moment. "You would probably get along well with the rest of Ino's team. See if she'll introduce you to Shikamaru and Choji." "It's a shame," he said. "One of my favorite students is actually out of town training. He would have jumped at the opportunity to take you under his wing." "Who is it?" Becky's curiosity was piqued. "Uzumaki Naruto," Aruka said. "He's befriended pretty much everyone your age here in Konoha. Hinata sure thinks he's the bee's knees," Becky said. He chuckled at that. "Aruka-sensei," a boy said as he ran in the room. "I forgot my homework." The boy had a blue scarf that trailed behind him like a tail. "Oh, Konohamaru," Aruka fished in a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a manila folder and took out a small packet. "Here you go." Konohamaru took the paper but his eyes never left Becky. "Hi kid." Becky gave him a friendly smile. "Konohamaru, this is Tsukimori Becky. She's from Getsugakur and she's visiting Konoha for a while. Her father is an ambassador. Isn't that cool?" "Yeah, it's cool," Konohamaru parroted, still staring at her. Aruka looked at Becky. Konohamaru is the grandson of the third Hokage, so he knows all the ins and outs of the village. If you ever need anything, he's a good fellow to ask. "I'll keep that in mind." Becky smiled at Konohamaru again. "So what do you say kid, you'll rescue me if I get into some trouble?" "Well, I mean, it depends," Konohamaru flushed suddenly. "I mean if you do something stupid and get in trouble and need help, you should fix it yourself. But, I mean, sure. Yeah, I'll help you. I'll hold you to that, Konohamaru. A shinobi is only as good as his word, Becky recited, a twinge of sadness hitting her when she heard her father's words come out of her mouth. Konohamaru looked at her like she had imparted some great wisdom to him and then ran off. You're good with kids, Uruka offered. Have you worked with children much? Not really, but I know they like feeling important, Becky replied. Just like adults. That's something I learned from my dad. Everyone wants to feel important. Uruka thought for a moment. I know you aren't from around here and you might not be interested, but we have kind of a half-day kindergarten Monday through Thursday. If you need help keeping busy, we could always use a hand. Becky was a little shocked. But I'm not even from here. I have known a lot of kids, Becky, Uruka smiled gently. I know a good one when I see one. Becky couldn't help but smile back. If you say so, she thought about it. I'd have to ask the Hokage if that's okay. Just let me know, Ms. Tsukimori, Uruka said. If you're interested, the position will be waiting for you. Becky made sure that she walked out of the school, but as soon as her feet hit the street she broke out into a full-on bolt. Now that Hinata's friends were back, she would start going on missions and spending time with them. The thought of hanging out around Hinata's house by herself was painful. Becky prayed the Hokage would give her the go-ahead on helping out at the school. There were a million reasons why she might say no, but Becky hoped Tsunade would make an exception all the same. She started to rehearse her case in her head, anticipating Tsunade's arguments and coming up with good counterpoints. She was so fixated on her imagined argument she didn't register the people walking out in front of her until it was too late. Team 8 was now directly in her path. If she tried to stop or change direction now, it would only cause her to ram into them without any control for how it went down. There was only one thing she could do. She called out the universally accepted command all shinobi responded to immediately. Duck. All four of them dropped low, just low enough for her to execute her plan. Becky planted her hands on Neji's shoulders and vaulted over his head, knocking him face down into the ground. Guy-sensei and Lee immediately jumped up and cheered her. That was amazing, Becky-chan. Lee's eyes shimmered with admiration. A dash of youth followed by a vault of triumph. A 9 out of 10. I knew you were worthy of the tights, Guy-sensei's smile sparkled. Wait, why aren't you wearing the tights? Becky caught herself responding but then remembered she had essentially curb-stomped Neji. Neji, are you okay? He's dazed. Tenten looked up her with exasperation. Why did you do that? I was lost in my thoughts and I didn't see you guys coming, Becky's voice wavered. Neji. He sat up and shook his head. Neji turned to face his attacker, and his eyes narrowed for a moment. He heaved a sigh and shakily regained his feet. I should have known it was you. Sorry, Neji. Becky apologized. You obviously had something important to get to. He waved her off. Don't worry about it. Get going. I'll make it up to you later, Becky called out over her shoulder as she ran away, prompting strange looks from both Tenten and Neji. Lee and Guy-sensei were too busy discussing how to incorporate vaulting into their training to notice. When she arrived at the Hokage's mansion, the guards nodded at her as she jogged up the steps. The guard outside the door held up a hand for her to wait. He popped his head inside and announced her in low tones. Becky heard Tsunade's voice, but she couldn't make out what she had said. The guard slid back out and closed the door. The Hokage wants you wait out here for a few minutes. Okay. Becky stepped back a little to give him personal space. So, what's it like being a guard? Are you trying to make small talk with me? The guard stared her down. It's that or stand here awkwardly in silence with me staring at my feet and you pretending to gaze at nothing. Becky shrugged. Silence it is. Look, kid, standing outside a door all day is a pain, but it's my job. The guard used the same low tones he had to announce her. It must be hard to hear through walls. She was going to have to try it when she got home. Shizune stuck her head out and smiled at Becky. You can come in now, Tsukimori-san. Thank you. Becky bounced inside. Tsunade looked tired. It was cumulative exhaustion, like she hadn't had more than 4 hours of sleep in weeks. Becky realized all her counterpoints might be mute. With the way Tsunade looked, her best bet was to plead her case, and do it in as few words as possible. I know you're very busy, Becky started. Thank you for seeing me. Tsunade heaved a deep sigh and waved her hand for Becky to finish. I was wondering if I could help out with the preschool class at the academy. Becky tried not to fidget. Her father said fidgeting made you look weak. Hinata's going to start going on missions, and since I can't go on missions, I thought it would be a good way to keep busy. Would that be okay? Tsunade and Shizune exchanged an uncomfortable look. The Hokage heaved another sigh and adjusted her shirt before she replied. While I appreciate you taking the initiative to contribute back to society, unfortunately you aren't a leaf ninja, she explained. Parents wouldn't be pleased to have a kunoichi from some faraway village handling their children. So the problem is I haven't proven my worth. Becky was fidgeting behind her back. In a sense, yes. Tsunade, regardless, you've brought up a valid point. These talks are taking an eternity because of the paranoid king's demands all messages be brought in person. Your father and I are going to have to come up with something for you to keep busy. Can you promise not to let him apprentice me to a weaponsmith? Becky blinked back her childish fears. He keeps threatening to do just that. Tsunade gave a weak chuckle. Sure, kid, weaponsmithing is off the table. Now get out of here, you bother me. Becky bowed and turned to leave. She waved at Tsunade and Shizune as she closed the door and started heading down the stairs. About halfway down, she got self-conscious and gave a shy wave to the guard at the door. He promptly ignored her, but she felt better for acknowledging him. The potential volunteer work having ended in a bust bummed Becky out. On her way back to the compound, she picked up on the savory aroma of ramen. Her stomach growled. It had been hours since her last meal. She remembered Hinata would be out with her friends, so she shrugged and headed over to Ichiraku Ramen. The counter was full except for the squeaky seat at the end. She took it and pursued a childlike fascination with the way it squealed as she swiveled her hips back and forth. Tsuki paid her infantile behavior no mind as he took her order. Becky liked him. He was one of the few people who didn't double take when they saw a Getsu Nin running around. He also arranged her toppings into smiley faces. Becky was always under so much pressure to act grown up and mature that it was refreshing to have someone do something fun for her. It was as delicious as usual, its curative powers filling her belly and lifting her mood. She paid for her meal, took one last swivel on the chair, and started for home. Becky was only a few feet away from Ichiraku Ramen when she saw Hinata waving her down. There were 2 boys with her around their age and a dog the size of a horse. Those must be her teammates, Becky thought as she approached the trio. Hinata had a big smile on her face, the boy with the dog looked unsure, and the third boy's face was completely concealed by his hood and sunglasses. Guys, this is my roommate Tsukimori Becky. Hinata said with a smile. Becky, this is Aburame Shino and this is Inazuka Kiba. And who's this guy? Becky beamed, more interested in the dog. That's Akamura, Kiba said with unease. Be careful, he doesn't like it when strangers. Becky was scratching his chin and Akamaru was stamping his foot with joy. Pet him, Kiba finished quietly. We were going to go train, Hinata offered. Would you like to join us? I probably should, Becky sighed. I've been kind of neglectful of doing anything more strenuous than laundry. Surprisingly, Hinata did most of the talking as they walked. Shino was silent, but Becky recognized it as a listening silence. Her father employed the same strategy and found it fairly effective at getting people to spill all they knew. Kiba was the next most talkative, arguing with Hinata about how events had transpired and trying to take control of the conversation. After about 15 minutes of walking at a casual pace, they arrived at a large open field just outside of town. So how are we doing this? Girls versus guys? Becky asked. We could do that, Shino replied. Or we could square off 1-on-1. Or 2-on-1, in our case, Kiba gestured to himself and Akamaru. Hinata looked at them all in turn before she said. Maybe teams would be best. So boys versus girls it is, Becky stretched. They all got into fighting positions and Becky took a deep breath. It had been some time since she had sparred with kids her age. Usually, her dad let her come at him and just gave her suggestions on how to keep her guard up. The way the boys were looking though, they would be taking this match seriously. That made her nervous. She closed her eyes and felt the underground river flowing beneath the training field. If things got tight and her chakra got low, she could always utilize the existing elements to aid her. It was a lot easier to manifest a jutsu using what was around them than converting the moisture in the air into something suitable for ninjutsu. Once the match began, Akamaru turned into Kiba and they started charging the girls, bobbing and weaving so it was hard to tell who was who. Shino hung back. Watch out, Hinata said as she dove out of the way. Well, that's silly, Becky thought as she dodged, but then she saw what Hinata was really warning her about. Kiba's charge had masked the cloud of insects Shino sent in behind him. They swarmed around her face and got in her ears and nose. She started coughing but it made it worse. The insects got inside her mouth. Becky used a water jutsu to gush water out of her mouth, expelling the insects from her lungs, windpipe, mouth, and nose. It was unpleasant as hell and gave her a headache, but it got the job done. She looked back up to rejoin the fight and saw one of the Kibas coming for her. She did her best to deflect the onslaught of blows he laid upon her, but he was fast. Becky was tiring out. Using that water-expelling jutsu wore through her reserve and dulled her senses. She was also severely out of practice, having not trained consistently for over a month. This is just a sparring match, she thought. You can't get your ass kicked the first time you match up with these guys. You have to at least put up a decent fight, otherwise at best they'll think you're a loser and at worst you'll make a mockery of Getsu Shinobi everywhere. She jumped back to put some space between her and the Kiba. She looked over to Hinata to see her fighting the other Kiba and Shino. Water prison jutsu, Becky cried, locking Shino in a sphere of water. That will incapacitate his bugs, Becky thought as she assumed a more balanced stance. Hinata took the opportunity to clock her Kiba with a set of blows so fast Becky couldn't track them. Becky released the water sphere, allowing Hinata to seamlessly refocus her attacks onto Shino. Kiba came at Becky again and swung a roundhouse kick toward her chest. She leaned back as far as she could and his leg swept harmlessly just out of range. Becky snapped back up. Kiba was in too close and his body was still following the momentum of his kick. She punched him across the face as hard as she could and he went down facing away from her on all fours. Quick as a flash he had thrown his foot back and caught her on the chin. The blow knocked her off her feet and she smacked down on her back hard. Her head came down on something hard, probably a rock, and she saw stars. Kiba, what did you do? She heard Hinata yell. I was aiming for her chest, he said apologetically. I didn't know I was going to clip her on the chin like that. She heard them all come over to her but she kept her eyes closed. When she opened them the world spun and made her sick to her stomach. Are you okay? Hinata asked, her voice full of concern. I'll be fine just as soon as the world stops spinning, Becky groaned. Akamaru whimpered with sympathy. I'm okay boy, Becky tried opening her eyes. Things were finally steadying and she couldn't feel her ramen creeping up her esophagus anymore. That's when she noticed how far they all were keeping their distance. Their looks of concern were no longer necessarily for her. She sat up and the hair that had come loose from her braid fell in her face. It was an inky black instead of her usual silvery blonde. Oh no, she thought. Not now. It's okay. Becky laughed nervously as she sat up. It's just how my body reacts to incaps. Your hair changes color. Kiba asked incredulously. Yeah, I don't know, like a dog puffing up its fur. Becky started struggling to her feet. Is that all it does? Shino's voice was full of caution. There are stages, Becky said evasively. Becky, Hinata said steadily, her voice still filled with concern. Look, it won't ever be an issue unless I get taken hostage or tortured or something super gruesome like that. Becky was desperate to change the subject. It's no big deal. That was a good kick, by the way. Her hair was already fading back to its usual color, but the other stayed silent. They were watching her every move. You know what? You guys can keep training. Becky started stalking off toward the road. I'm not feeling so hot. I'm going to go home. I'll walk you. Hinata started after her. No, it's okay. Finish your training. Becky waved her away and continued off on her own.